The first thing I caught on my recorder was the sound of plates shivering in their stacks and a voice, female, breathless, saying, "Let go of me." I was 2 tables from the pies, pretending to choose between lemon meringue and pecan, when the lunch rush at Greyline Diner cracked into a silence that meant trouble had already started. My mic was live because I'd been chasing a tip about wage skimming on this very block. The lens on my small camera picked up tile floors in a fluorescent hallway that dead ends into the employee bathroom. The man in the pressed shirt, later identified as the manager, moved first, his left hand clamped around the wrist of the black waitress I would come to know as Nia Bennett. He said, we're going to talk now. And if the rest of the room hadn't frozen, that grip would have told the whole story. I called out the timestamp reflexively, 11:42 a.m., Tuesday, and hit save. The work I do takes me into rooms where the polite story is already eating the real one from the inside. If you follow this channel, you know we put the real one back on the table. Like and subscribe for more stories that challenge prejudice and celebrate courage. Witnesses later stated they saw the manager's thumb press into her pulse like a seal. They didn't see the small tremor in her other hand until the water glass she'd been carrying broke into wet, glittering sand. "Hey," the busser said, a kid with a buzz cut and a ring of acne like a life preserver around his mouth. "Hey, man." The manager didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on Nia and pulled her toward the hallway where the exit sign led nowhere useful, just a mop closet and a door that said employees only. The blue door to the bathroom banged once and cleared a ring of quiet the way a bell clears a church. A couple at the counter stared over their pancakes. No one moved fast. People rarely do until they know which way the story is going to break. And in places like this, the story often breaks against the person with the least power. "Do you see that?" I asked out loud, because I needed a chorus. You can listen to the recording for the answers, soft and human, like someone agreeing not to drown. The busser said, "He does that sometimes," into his breath, a confession he didn't know he'd made. My camera found the hallway. I didn't go down it. The rules are not magical, but they are there. Don't get in the way. Don't make it worse. "Call her husband," the hostess whispered to no one in particular. "He's around." He said he'd be around. In my field notes, I drew the hallway like a map of a narrow country where all the roads funnel into one locked border. According to the Greyline's floor plan, the restroom and the office share a plaster wall. The only way in is from the dining room. The only way out is back through the eyes of everyone eating their pancakes. It takes training to hear the shape of a situation through what isn't said. I didn't hear screaming. I heard Nia say, "You're not allowed to touch me." Then a scrape like someone of average strength trying to become larger with the help of a door frame. "You're stealing," the manager hissed. That much came through the wood. "We're going to talk off the floor." It was 10 seconds from the time the bathroom door shut to when a man in a charcoal overcoat stood up from a corner booth I had not registered as occupied and began moving. He was tall and didn't hurry. The bunched tendons in his jaw were the only part of him that betrayed motion faster than his steps. He passed me and I swept him with the mic without thinking, because you learn to collect first and ask names later. The hostess, the same one who had whispered, said, "Marco," like she was handing a prayer to a real person. The door did not open for him because he did not force it. He knocked. It's on the audio, 3 controlled knocks. "Sir," he said, not loud, "open the door and take your hands off my wife." I have replayed the next 15 seconds in a winter of nights. They matter because they changed how every person in that diner understood both the power they had and the power they were told to fear. The manager said, "This is a work matter," and Marco, still not pushing the door, replied, "It became a police matter when you put hands on her. Open the door." The busser had his phone out by then. It took him 2 tries to pull up the camera. According to my video, his thumb shook enough to turn his focus into a blur that looked like poor weather. "Open the door," Marco said again. Then he turned his head and said, "Call 911. It was unclear who he meant until the hostess pulled the phone from the holster on her apron and tapped. When panic is shared, competency is whatever you have time to do. Several people would later tell me they recognized Marco then. That recognition moved through the room like a rumor on legs. He wasn't new to the block. According to city records and a stack of clippings from the worst year of his life, he had been named in a RICO indictment a decade earlier, widely called a MAFIA boss by papers that used the phrasing to plug holes in their fear. An appellate court would later revise words like that into something flat and recorded. Conspiracy, intimidation, racketeering, followed by the phrase "not guilty," followed by the phrase "cooperation agreement," followed by a quiet decade in which he ran a legitimate logistics company and kept his head down. Gossip did not keep time with paperwork. The gossip lived its own life. The door opened. I didn't see inside. My lens had the door and a sliver of the tile in frame, the rest blocked out by the angle and a laminated poster of a smiling omelet. From audio only, the manager's voice, brittle and sure, saying, "Nia, you can go back out. We'll talk later." From Nia, a breath catching hard on the second inhale. From Marco, "Step back, sir." When they emerged into view, the manager's face was already arranged as a story he could live with. He let go and held his hands up, palms out. Nia's forearm was marked where fingers had been. You could make a map from it. She didn't cry. She brushed her apron, nodded once to someone in the room who wasn't me, and stepped to Marco's side without touching him. "Police are on their way," the hostess reported. "They told us to separate." "Good," Marco said. "Who's the owner on duty?" "Just him," someone answered, meaning the manager. "Then we wait." The manager attempted to marshal his dignity into something bigger than the room. He said, "She's been skimming from the tip pool. I needed to speak with her off the floor." His mouth did not hesitate on the word needed. Nia's voice came quiet but not small. "You grabbed me. Twice. You told me to shut my mouth. You told me girls like me." She cut herself off because the rest was for another room. The busser, who had angled himself like a human witness stand, muttered, "He said," and then shut up when the manager shot him a look. "Save it," Marco stated, scanning the ceiling for cameras. "Where's the footage? Don't touch it." Gray Line's cameras are stainless eyes in the ceiling that watch cash drawers more than they watch people. According to their spec sheet, they keep a rolling 30 days. According to the assistant night manager, who spoke to me later on the condition of not being named in any public way, the back-of-house hallway camera had been mysteriously glitchy for 3 months. That day, somebody's mystery was about to have civic consequences. The responding officers came with radio chatter and the kind of slow steps that say, "We are here to decide if this is a fire or just a smoke machine." They took statements, asked for IDs, requested to see the red marks on Nia's arm, which she showed them without commentary. One officer spoke to the manager and used the phrase "alleged contact," and then, "Do you consent to us viewing your security footage?" Disclaimers rolling off his tongue like beads on a string. This part of the scene is public record. The report notes visible bruising consistent with grip, verbal altercation, and multiple witnesses corroborate complainant's account. It also notes that the manager framed his actions as necessary for loss prevention. And Nia stated that the accusation of theft was retaliation for raising concerns about unequal shift assignments and racial comments. The report ends with, "Parties separated. Complainant advised of right to seek order of protection. Recommended follow-up with Civil Rights Bureau." We all have a reflex for seeing stories end too early. A police report can be a ribbon someone slaps on a box to avoid looking inside it. When the room reset and a few people forked pancakes back into their mouths, I stayed at the counter and ordered coffee I didn't want. Marco stood nearby with his hands empty and the look of a man who knows how much trouble he could cause by doing nothing. He was careful with his silence. It's a shape you learn only after other shapes have taught you grief. "Not here," he said to Nia, just loud enough for me because I was closer than I would admit to being. "Let's get you seen, then we'll deal with this the right way." She nodded, looked at my camera, and I saw the thing happen that happens when a person decides to become legible on purpose. "Are you media?" she asked. "I'm a reporter," I answered. "Freelance, investigative. I cover labor and civil rights. I was already following a story about this place." She held my gaze a beat. "Good," she said, and tossed her apron onto a stack of menus. I didn't interview them at the diner. There are windows you don't knock at because the inside is busy. The police officer offered to call an ambulance. Nia declined. The hostess scribbled a note with her name and number and squeezed Nia's shoulder in a small, public act of testimony that I would remember later when people from corporate tried to call Nia alone. According to the ER intake form from the clinic 4 blocks away, Nia presented with soft tissue bruising to right wrist/forearm. The nurse recorded, "Patient states manager pulled her into restroom against her will, denies head injury, reports prior verbal harassment race and gender." Photos were taken, the angle was clinical, useful, impersonal. We sat in the waiting room. If you want me to invent glamour, this isn't that kind of story. Marco took his coat off and made himself look smaller by draping it across his knees. He didn't touch Nia. She stared at the muted television as if reading subtitles that weren't there. "I'm sorry," he said. She shot him a look that was not blame, but was something heavier than love and lighter than forgiveness. "You didn't do this," she replied. He breathed out through his nose. "I could have," he started, then stopped. "Don't," she said. You did right." When they were called back, I stayed and sent emails with subject lines that end up in FOIA requests, request for incident report, request for security footage, 11 was 12 Awung, request for internal policies, staff discipline procedures, comment request, allegations of racial harassment. I left a voicemail for Grayline Corporate PR that began with my full name and ended with deadline is 5 p.m. Because sometimes dignity is making someone else have to hurry. By late afternoon, my inbox had transformed into a staging area for a small war. Grayline Corporate responded with a statement that used words like unfortunate and misunderstanding, and included the sentence, "We take allegations of misconduct seriously and have placed the manager on paid leave pending a thorough internal review." A paragraph later, the statement added, "We do not comment on personnel matters, but we can say that Grayline stands against discrimination in all forms." And I highlighted that sentence 3 times and made a note to ask what forms were excluded. The assistant night manager replied, not with a quote, but with something better. A list of names of former staff who had quit after filing complaints no one called back about. "If you say I sent this, I'll deny it," she wrote. "I got kids, but somebody's got to tell it." I reached Nia and Marco that evening at their apartment. They met me in the lobby because privacy isn't the same thing as secrecy. Their place smelled like turmeric and lemon cleanser. A calendar on the wall had 2 doctor's appointments highlighted and a sticky note with resume written in thick ink. We sat at the small table. I turned my phone screen down and set the recorder between us. I introduced the rules, off the record, on the record, and the option to stop whenever. They chose on the record. "Let me tell you what I know," I began, "because this is how you keep trust. Demonstrate you paid attention. I've seen this morning's police report. I've received a general statement from corporate. I've got names of other staff who describe a pattern of harassment and sloppy handling of complaints. What I don't have is your story in your words." Nia nodded. She had wrapped her wrist in a soft bandage. The mark looked less like a map now and more like a place you'd avoid going back to. "He said, 'Girls like you are lucky to be here,'" she told me. He started saying it when I asked for Saturdays off twice a month. "I have church on Saturdays sometimes in a group I meet with." He said, "Yeah, we need team players." I said, "Team players don't get pulled by the arm into a bathroom." He didn't like me saying what things are. Some men don't. "How long has he been your manager?" I asked. 7 months, she replied. "I started at Grayline a year and a half ago. I like the work. I'm good at what I do. I remember orders. I make regulars feel seen. It matters to me." "Have you reported him prior to today?" I asked. "Yes," she said. She tapped the recorder lightly with her fingernail. 3 times to HR, once to the owner's brother, who comes in sometimes to check the store, once to him directly, with the hostess in the room as a witness. I have the emails. He called me aggressive in his reply. "Can I see?" She slid her phone across the table. The emails were there, crisp and dated. The subject lines wound tight like springs. Hostile work environment, unfair shift assignments, discriminatory language. Corporate's replies were template-shaped. "Thank you for your feedback. We take all concerns seriously." There's a special exhaustion reserved for reading the phrase "we take seriously" in a context where nothing has been done. Marco watched me scroll. I didn't ask him about his past. He brought it with him the way the weather brings itself. "I know what they call me," he said, as if answering a question I had not asked out loud. "The papers made a movie out of my worst year. I paid for the life I lived with the rest of my life. I came out the other side. I don't put hands on anybody. I don't threaten. I run a legit business. I coach baseball in the spring, but bring harm to my wife, and I will use every legal tool I have to make it expensive." "People were afraid when they recognized you," I said carefully. "It changed the air. That fear is part of the story, whether we like it or not." He nodded. "I know. That's why I knocked." Nia took his hand then. "And if you want a bigger reason for me to believe in hope than that, you're asking the wrong reporter." The following day at 9:07 a.m., my inbox received a set of internal documents from an address that would later bounce. The subject line read, "They knew." Inside, a PDF of an HR log with complaint entries redacted except for dates and outcomes. I cross-referenced those dates with the names I had received the night before. The entries were real, the outcomes were not reassuring. Coaching conversation held, reminder of policies, no action warranted at this time. Black employees had complained about slurs said under breath while orders were up. Latina kitchen staff had raised flags about disparate discipline. 2 employees had reported being touched in a way that no one should be touched, and their entries ended with insufficient evidence. The manager, according to a separate performance review, had been praised for maintaining order during busy periods. I called Grayline Corporate and requested comment on the newly obtained documents. The PR rep's voice tightened so quickly I heard the sound of a script being thrown out. "We don't recognize those documents," she said. "We can't verify their authenticity." I read a sentence to her anyway. Employee raised concerns about language referencing girls like you used in disciplinary context. I asked if the phrase girls like you was acceptable according to their policies. She punted. We are committed to a respectful workplace. I asked if the manager had prior documented complaints. She said, yo, personnel matters are confidential. I asked if the hallway camera had been broken for 3 months. She said, so we are looking into it. By noon, a copy of the security footage from a neighboring pharmacy arrived via a courier paid in cash. If you stand in the right place behind the counter of the drugstore, you can see into the diner's hallway through the glass doors. The footage wasn't perfect. Refraction and glare do what they do. But it was sufficient to depict a man in a white shirt closing his hand around a woman's wrist and leading her past the restroom sign. There was no sound, but you can read force whether or not you are fluent in film. I called Naya. We have a second camera, I said. She was quiet for a long time. Thank you, she answered. Then, I want a file. I offered names of civil rights attorneys who don't take a case as a hobby. She already had a number written on the same sticky that said resume. The attorney was a woman named Alicia Park, whose voice carried the cadence of courtrooms where the air is heavy with cheap wood and personal ruin. We met that afternoon in her office, where the blinds cut the sun into stripes that arrested in the air. Here's what will happen if you file with the city's Human Rights Commission, Alicia said. They will investigate. They will subpoena records. They will ask employees to talk under penalty of perjury. Grayline will hire their own attorney who will try to make you smaller than your story. The manager will say it was a misunderstanding, that he meant to protect the customers from a scene. They will call you aggressive. They will print your husband's past on glossy paper and hand it around to suggest you live in a haze of violence. You will want to break something. Don't. We will let the evidence do what evidence does. What about the union? Marco asked. Alicia nodded. If the NLRB has to walk in there with a badge to tell them to stop interfering with organizing, so be it. But that's a separate track. If you're asking me, can these two rivers merge? Yes. There's power in the confluence. Nia listened. I want to do it right, she said. Not because I need this job. I can get a job. I want them to have to change the way they treat the people who come after me. We filed. The commission stamped the date. They collected the report from the police, the ER images, the pharmacy footage, my contact information as the reporter who had recorded the initial scene, names of witnesses, and copies of emails in which the phrase, girls like you, tried to pass for management. They notified Grayline that an investigation was open. The retaliation started in the ordinary ways. A rumor toured the block that Nia had threatened the manager first. An anonymous post on a neighborhood forum claimed she had a history. A fake account sent me a DM advising me to cover real crimes instead of some waitress who couldn't handle discipline. Alicia's office received a letter suggesting that Nia's husband had been seen associating with known felons near a construction site. The letter's postmark was 3 miles from the diner. The language was a copy of a tired playbook. I cataloged it all. When they pull this on you, the tally sheet becomes its own indictment. Inside the diner, the air changed temperature. According to employees who spoke on background, corporate sent 2 trainers with lanyards and smiles too hard to be friendly. They led a morning briefing that included the phrases, remind customers of our commitment, and we do not discuss internal matters externally, and it is a violation to share footage. Someone in that room texted me the handout. I circled the line that said, always maintain professionalism, hung it above my desk, and wrote next to it, how about management? The union talk, which had been simmering like a pot left too low to boil, clicked to a higher heat. A representative from a hospitality workers union began printing flyers and sliding them into aprons. The busser, whose name I will not print because he's 19 and still has to learn how to come home from a long day without turning the TV on too loud, just to drown out the parts that were not fair, began collecting cards. He asked to meet me and Alicia at the park across the street, where a basketball backboard had only one net and the grass tried its best through summer's wear. He brought the hostess and a cook named Lupe. They said they wanted to talk, and then they talked. They described how the manager scheduled black servers on weekdays when tips are thin and white servers on Friday nights. They described how he joked about language barriers when assigning kitchen tasks, how he was always just kidding. They described break times cut short for team needs and how the manager's team looked like him. They described that day's grip on Nia's wrist like it was not the first time his hands had thought of themselves as policy. I signed up to be misunderstood when I started this work, but hearing a detail like that one from 3 different people with no reward to gain except a cleaner conscience, it makes your bones ring. I recorded and asked questions I trained my voice to make smaller than their answers. I read back their quotes, and they nodded. "Don't make me the sinner," the hostess insisted. "Make it about the pattern," I promised. I revoked that promise later only slightly by printing evidence that required her name. I apologized to her 3 times, and she forgave me on the second. Grayline's attorney called Alicia and asked for a meeting to explore resolution opportunities. That phrase is an instrument that plays one note: settle. We scheduled the meeting for a Tuesday in a conference room that smelled like toner and fear. They brought a team: a man with a haircut that says I don't pay for my own lunches, a woman who said we're a family, about a place that printed last names on paychecks, and a younger associate who had not yet learned how to look at people who live check to check and treat them as complex as clients who pay 6 figures. They offered an apology and a non-disclosure agreement. They offered money. They offered to review policies. There is a sentence you hear in these rooms that lets you know whether you're going to have to fight longer. We don't admit wrongdoing. Alicia's reply was a sculpture. My client is not interested in your admission, she said. She's interested in your repair. That looks like public accountability, mandatory training with a third party, an independent monitor for 18 months, a commitment to equitable scheduling, back pay for anyone whose hours were cut after making a complaint, an apology you deliver out loud, not on embossed letterhead, and a consent decree with the commission that has a stick built into it. The money is last. They balked. They brought up Marco. I waited for it, and they did not disappoint. With all due respect to your client, the man with the haircut said, this situation is complicated by the fact that the complainant's husband is a figure with a certain reputation. We have to be mindful of safety. Alicia did not blink. You mean the rumor that he is a mafia boss, propagated by tabloids a decade ago? He has no record. He has not threatened anyone. He called the police. He asked politely for the door to be opened. He did the thing you teach people to do. You are not going to use his past as a scarecrow to frighten away your obligations here. We have to consider context, the woman said. The context, Alicia replied, is a man grabbing a black woman's arm in a workplace after repeated complaints about discrimination went unaddressed. If you want to add context, add your HR logs. They asked for time. They always ask for time. Time in cases like this is money, not to the victim, to the company. The longer the air war goes on, the more likely the public gets exhausted and the narrative can be quietly redirected. I have 2 jobs in this dance: document and hold the attention of people who have a million other things to pay attention to. I published the first piece 3 days after the incident. The headline read, "Video contradicts manager's denial and diner harassment case, pattern of complaints emerges." I embedded the pharmacy footage. I wrote it with the restraint of a person who will be sued if he lets adjectives do the work of facts. The leadee was a sentence you would recognize from the first line of this piece. According to the report, witnesses stated, based on internal documents, I did not mention the rumor about Marco in the first paragraph. I put it in the third to give it scale. Tabloids once painted Bennett's husband, a logistics business owner, as a mafia boss during a failed prosecution a decade ago, a label his attorney calls dangerous fiction. On Tuesday, he did what the city's own community safety trainings advise. He called 911. The response was immediate and divided as always. It also did something useful. The city's Human Rights Commission sent a letter to Grayline ordering them to preserve all relevant documents and footage under penalty of sanctions. The commission also sent a team to take statements in person. People in that diner, freed from the solitary edge of their fear, began to talk as if talking together could do more than survive a day. 2 weeks into the investigation, a second set of internal documents landed on my desk. These were emails between the manager and his regional director. The phrases were boilerplate until they weren't. We need to make an example out of this one, the manager had written in reference to Naya. The reply, be careful what you put in writing. Another, her tone is often rude. She challenged me in front of staff. On another, to be transparent, her community commitments are not going to fly if she wants Saturdays. I verified the headers, the server stamps, the domain. I called the regional director for comment. The call went to voicemail. I read the email back to him and left the line open for 5 silent minutes. I showed Nia the emails. She held the phone without looking at me and then placed it face down on the table. He said community like it was a problem, she said finally. He said tone like he wasn't talking about race. What do you want people to know when they read that? I asked. That I didn't invent their disrespect, she replied. I just refused to carry it for them. The hearing at the commission was scheduled for a Thursday. The waiting area outside the room had the geometry of 10,000 other waiting areas where rights are measured and recorded. Tan chairs, a bubbling water cooler, a poster about discrimination not being tolerated pinned to a bulletin board with a pushpin that had seen better days. We sat. Marco's lawyer, a quiet man with a history of saying, "Yes, Your Honor," as a form of art, slid a folder toward him. "You will not speak," he said gently. "You will let your presence be the story you want to tell about yourself." Marco nodded, an old muscle memory resisting and then standing down. Grayline's attorney arrived with a stack of binders like a wall. The manager came in alone, his neck raw above his collar like he had been rubbing it. He didn't look at Nia. He didn't look anywhere long enough to learn anything. When the time came, we filed into a room that holds more history than it knows how to live with. The hearing officer began by reminding everyone that this was not a trial but carried the solemnity of a thing that could become one. Nia testified. She used phrases like, "He pulled my wrist," and the words, "girls like you," and "I reported it." She didn't let a single sentence stand without a date or a description. Alicia walked her through the emails, the ER photos, the police report. The hearing officer asked if she had experienced any retaliation since filing. She said yes. She described the rumors, the stares when she passed the diner on her way to the train, the texts from unknown numbers. "I blocked them," she said. "I won't let cowards rent space in my head," the manager testified. He said he had mishandled the interaction but had only intended to avoid a scene. He referred to Naya's attitude and tone. He denied any racial animus and claimed a miscommunication. Alicia read his "make an example out of this one" email into the record. He said it was out of context. She read the month and the subject line into the record. He did not look less small for the correction. Then the commission addressed the pattern. They introduced the HR log. The hearing officer said, "For the record, please explain why complaints alleging discriminatory comments resulted in no formal discipline." The company's attorney talked about insufficient corroboration, interventions, and retraining. The hearing officer asked, "Who was retrained?" The answer was, "the team." The hearing officer asked, "Was the manager ever placed on a performance improvement plan related to discrimination?" The answer was a no disguised as a paragraph. The union busser, the hostess, and the cook described what they had seen, each in their own alphabet. When they said the phrase "girls like you" separately, the room built its own echo. When the busser admitted he had hesitated to speak because he needed his job, Naya didn't cry, but I did. A small private grief for a city that still makes 19-year-olds carry that kind of arithmetic. The commission took the matter under advisement. Time resumed. In these spaces, justice has a tempo unrelated to the heart. Grayline called again to settle. The money went up. The conditions remained too light. "We will commit to training," they said. Alicia replied, "I want an independent monitor." "We will do a review," they said. "We want a consent decree with enforceable benchmarks," Alicia replied. "We will apologize privately," they said. "You will apologize where the harm was done," Alicia said, out loud. A week later, with the sightlines of the city piercing through a morning that didn't feel like anything yet, the commission issued its findings. Probable cause to believe discrimination and harassment occurred, failure to follow internal procedures, retaliatory comments documented. They announced a conciliation conference and, if no agreement, a referral to the city attorney for enforcement. The findings included a recommendation. Given the pattern of complaints, an independent monitor is appropriate. Grayline blinked. It is a sentence that belongs in more official documents than it currently does. They agreed to terms that, according to a person familiar with the negotiation, made the haircut man grind his teeth. The agreement included termination of the manager for cause, a public apology delivered at the diner, a 6-figure fund set aside for back pay and damages for impacted employees, a third-party trainer to conduct anti-bias and anti-harassment training, an independent monitor for 18 months with authority to audit scheduling, promotion, and complaints. A requirement that HR responses include timelines and outcomes visible to the complainant, and a commitment to remain neutral in any union organizing, verified by a memorandum to staff. The apology took place on a Tuesday because Grayline likes Tuesdays for things it wants to end early. The press came. I brought my camera and a new notebook because some days deserve their own pages. Employees lined up behind a long counter that had seen babies teething on crayons and men setting down ring boxes and women deciding to order dessert after all. The regional director stood with a microphone and the specific look of a person whose job for the day is to perform regret, not as theater, but as a public admission of injury. He said, "What? We failed." And the air changed. He said, we harmed." And the stove fan clicked on as if even machines were tired. He said, we are sorry." And for once the word was not a damp cloth thrown over a flame. In the back, a man whose eggs had just arrived stopped his fork in the air and listened. Nia did not stand at the front. She stood at the side, with the union busser, the hostess, Lupe, and a nurse from the clinic who had come as a citizen. Marco stood behind them. He held his hands folded like a person standing at the edge of a new river. When the regional director finished, Alicia stepped up and read a statement from Nia because sometimes your voice should not have to do every job. I came to Gray Lane to work, to serve, and to be treated with respect, Alicia read. I raised concerns about discrimination. I was pulled into a bathroom. I filed a report. Because of the courage of my coworkers and the work of this commission, my city told me I was not wrong about what I felt on my skin. This is not the end. This is the beginning. If you are reading this and your wrist is still sore, speak. Someone will hear you. She turned to Nia, and Nia nodded. The room clapped. Not a standing ovation, just hands saying, "We know what this noise is for." The union election happened the following month. The tally went the way fear didn't want it to. The Gray Line on that corner now has a schedule board where shifts can't be changed without a paper that lives in a mailbox with a union's lock. The hallway camera was replaced. The bathroom door was rehung so it doesn't bang like a gavel anymore. The new manager is a woman who used to run breakfasts at a hotel on the other side of town. She treats the line cook's burn with the same urgency she treats a customer's complaint. The hostess is now the assistant manager. Lupe negotiated a raise. The busser started hosting sometimes and hasn't dropped a plate in weeks. As for Marco, the word mafia moves through the neighborhood now like a joke that grew old and lost its timing. He still hates it. He still hears it sometimes on the wind. He tells the baseball team he coaches that all power looks like a test and that passing is mostly refusing to play the version someone else brought. I saw him on a Saturday morning. After the apology, the diner was quieter than the Tuesday. Nia was not on shift. She had resigned after the hearing and enrolled in a program to become a social worker focused on labor rights. She said she wanted her days to be made of other people's doors opening, not closing. She and Marco met me for coffee across the street where the pharmacy cameras still see more than they want to. She had a textbook in her bag and a grin that made the overhead light look like it was trying to catch up. "You did good," I said, which is not a professional way to sign off, but is the only way that made sense. "Nah," she replied, letting one syllable do the work of modesty and relief. "We did what people should get to do when they're telling the truth." "What do you want me to put at the end of the story?" I asked. She thought about it and then said, "Write that a manager once dragged a black waitress into a bathroom and the city told him to let go. Write that sometimes the husband you fear is just a man knocking instead of breaking. Write that a girl like me is not a girl at all, but a person with a name and a file and a city behind her. Write that if your silence is keeping someone else safe, keep it. If it's only keeping you quiet, don't." I wrote that down. Then I wrote this part. "The camera we carry behind our eyes gets better at turning toward what matters the more we choose to look. I make my living by reminding you and me to aim it well. Like and subscribe for more stories that challenge prejudice and celebrate courage." When I turned the recorder off, the coffee shop sound came back, loud and ordinary. It sounded like people who had no idea their lunch was once a courtroom. It sounded like a city that had learned, again, how not to turn away. It sounded like hope, which is to say, it sounded like work.